evening. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the July meeting of the Board of Directors for the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. Thank you for joining me this evening. We will start out with roll call.
Director Hoffman.
Here.
Director Adams.
Here.
Director Edwards.
Here.
Director Evans.
Here.
Director Byrne. Here. Director Riley.
Here.
And Director Potter. Here. All present.
Wonderful. And if you'll stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. And now open it up for oral communications. Anybody wishing to address the board on any item that is not on the agenda or is on the consent calendar, informational items, closed session items, or anything of that sort, you may step up. Okay, then we will close oral communications. And and we will move on to the consent calendar. Any board members wishing to pull any items for further discussion?
I would.
Director Hoffman?
Item 3, 7, and 9.
3, 7, and 9. Any other directors? Any members of the public wishing to pull any items? Okay, then I will.
Make the motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of 3, 7, and 9.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, Director Byrne, and a second from Director Edwards, I think. And any further discussion? So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item number 3, which is the considered contract with Pueblo Water Resources to provide aquifer storage and recovery operational support.
Yeah, John, can you take this one? I thought Maureen was going to be here
Was
for
there a
the.
specific question?
Yeah,
Did
is
you
there
have a
anything
specific
that
question?
was,
Yeah, I have several questions actually on the item.
okay, would you
Go ahead and
ask?
Just
staff?
go ahead and do that
Yeah,
instead
just
of-
go ahead and ask. It'll be fine.
So we don't have to go through the whole
Yeah.
presentation.
So, first off, were there any other qualified firms provided an opportunity to submit a proposal for this work?
No, this has been a standing item that we've used them with a pre-selected amount not to exceed, and it's based on they're the firm that part of what's in this is actually the money that's used to write the compliance reports for the regional board. So that's one of the tasks that's in this, and then to provide field assistance when we get in we're not staffed appropriately because of the high workload that comes when ASR is operating. To have that, we don't have enough to keep that staff busy as if we were doing, because we're not operating a full operation. So it's something to bring them on and have them able to plug in. Some years you don't even use them, and the efficiency of having someone that's already ready to come with boots on the ground and not have to educate someone. So I personally believe that there is not another firm that has the level of qualifications to with the readiness being the qualification.
Yeah, in the packet that was provided, there was no scope of work for us to look at to see what we're paying potentially $70,000 for.
And
So-
this was brought up by Director Evans in the meeting. So I did go and look, and it is the writing of the report and then just not to exceed number of hours at their billing rate for field support, helping sampling. Mainly what they're used for is if something isn't working right, we can still keep operating and they can come diagnose a problem and interface with the drillers to come and fix our wells for us.
Okay, because the way this is seemed to be laid out was more of them collecting samples that are required by the state board
They can do that. They do support us in any way that is needed. It's also with, if we have an extended absence of one of our employees that works on that project, they've subbed in the past and helped. And so they're kind of as needed operational support in an expert capacity manner.
To do sampling requires being certified operators.
Yes.
So the staff of
Yeah,
this consulting firm are certified operators?
the staff has a T4, D4.
Well, they can have one, but the person actually collecting samples has to do that.
Yeah, and the people on the ground have T2, D2s.
Okay, and so that was part of the qualification package that they submitted, so we can verify that that's in fact the case? Because the certifications expire.
No, but I can check on that. I have all faith that they're valid, but I will check.
Yes, the other thing that just seemed to me was that $70,000 for collecting samples. Again, not having a scope of work, it was just difficult to try to conceive of how you can spend $70,000 collecting samples and having them sent to MBAS.
John, can you speak to the cost of this contract in previous years?
As far it's been budgeted and some at 70 for the time I've been involved with ASR, which was your point in how come it's not has an escalator to it, and the answer was that different amounts are used. We've used as little as 20 to 25, which is just the amount of time to write the compliance reports and iterate on those with the regulators, to up to the full amount when we've had a operating year of 150 and we had a smaller staff, and we have a slightly larger, we have an extra half-time person that can run ASR now as opposed to before. So in the most recent years, we haven't used as much, and so.
Yeah, I just would appreciate when we get consideration of contracts, that we actually get the contract to look at and a scope of work so that we can have the information that we need to make a decision.
Okay.
Because what was provided was just simply a monitoring plan. And so it led me to believe that this is what they're doing for $70,000.
Right.
Yeah, so that,
And this is up to 70,000.
Correct.
And is there anybody else out there that could do this? Because this firm been with us since the building of that. Is there
Right.
anybody else that can come in today to do what you need to be done?
Not without training, not without taking our staff time to train.
Okay, thank you.
so when you say that, because I know personally that other firms locally that do the water quality monitoring for water systems, for their systems. So there are people out there that do the water quality monitoring for other systems.
Right, and I'm understanding next time I need to make it not have that much of a focus, because that's taking away from the actual other tasks of actually being able to go out, start an ASR well in injection, but understand the monitoring protocols that need to be followed and the operational protocols that need to be done, as well as being able to understand the effects that turning on these large-scale flows have on the CalAm system, and understanding who at CalAm is watching those and being able to communicate with CalAm, so that they're fairly plugged in, which it would take. It's not just collecting samples, it's being plugged into the whole program.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. Chair.
And just to remind the board, when it comes to contracts, we did request a position for contract specialist in the budget that we just approved last month, and so how we deal with all the contract issues could be changing if we get that position filled.
So I believe we need a motion on.
Yes.
So,
Would you like to make the motion since you pulled the item?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve of the contract with Pueblo for the services.
second,
Okay, great. We have a motion, Director Hoffman, and a second, Director Byrne. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to item number 7. Approve slate of candidates for election to Special District Risk Management Authority Board of Directors.
This is-
Director Hoffman,
yeah.
what were your questions on this one?
Yeah, just my question is, there was 5 folks listed, and I just wanted to figure out what was the basis of choosing the 3 that were chosen versus the other 2 that weren't.
And since Mr. Hamlin's not here to defend himself, we'll start with him. If, in fact, he's the one that I'm thinking of. Oh, they're out of order, or out of the order I looked at them. Mr. Hamlin. Oh, or these are just the ones that we're putting forward. Right, okay, so you don't have the information on the other two. So we looked at their responses, we looked at their experience. Mr. Hamlin, well, you can see, for example, the first candidate, Bob Swan, actually spent some time on the, why do you want to serve, what have you done, and so forth, and there was effort put into his responses. Mr. Hamlin was pretty cursory, and there was very little detail, so we knew nothing about him, other than I think he owned an insurance brokerage as a private business person. And then I can't tell you what Patrick O'Rourke's situation was, but obviously there's two incumbents, so they were very able to speak to their experience with SDRMA, and but yeah, we've just reviewed their criteria, not knowing any of them personally, and we said, well, here's what you get. And we had a coin flip between Suresh and I as to who got to pick which three, and I lost. So, yeah, there was not a whole lot of method to our madness on this.
But it does sound like, Dave, that you reviewed their candidate statements.
Yes.
And based on that review and what you could glean from it, it was the basis of choosing?
It was, and the only holdback, I think, was that many of these districts are really teeny tiny, and I was uncomfortable that any of them had real large-scale water agency experience. But at least the two incumbents had been through the business of being on the agency, so it would have been nice to see some different candidates. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Make a motion to approve these three candidates?
Second.
All right, so that was a coin flip on who seconded. So I'll say that there was a motion from Director Byrne and a second from Director Adams. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to the item number 9, consider adoption of Resolution 2019-09, amending Rule 24, Table 4, high efficiency appliance credits for gray water and rainwater reuse.
Yeah, and again, the question that I had that struck me is in the table. I think it was the table. Yeah, that was kind of a red flag for me, is it lumps rainwater with gray water toilet flushing, as well as gray water clothes washing. Now, I'm not aware that the Department of Public Health has approved the use of gray water for clothes washing.
Yes, they have. California Plumbing Code allows for the reuse of, the reuse of treated rainwater and gray water for clothes washing. When Water Demand Committee first heard this item, I believe it was at their April meeting, we had Roger Van Horn, who is with the Monterey County Department of Environmental Health, come in and speak to the committee about the county requirements. So everything is, excuse me, the district does not oversee the permitting of these types of systems. The health department does. So they have to go through the health department. The district is only facilitating the use of these systems.
And we can identify two systems, one a residential system that we've actually seen
In action, yeah.
in action, and then there's a commercial laundry which is in effect recycling its own laundry use so that it becomes gray water, and by recycling it's in place. But
It goes through a purification system,
Yeah,
essentially. So.
but these are very few and far between. But yeah, we've got public health and there's still the issues of redundancy. So kind of on toilet flushing, the reason it's this factor is we don't know yet for sure if they're worth 0 fixture units or 0.25 fixture units or what have you. And it's the same thing with the laundry systems. It's also new. once you get sign off from public health, then you know it can exist, but until you actually see it and get some data, you don't even know if you're gonna be close on the factor. But, yeah, they're coming.
That's the only question I had. Just, in my experience, this wasn't allowed, only subsurface irrigation
Yeah,
was.
it's fairly new, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all I had.
Motion to approve.
Second.
9.
Motion Director Byrne, and then second from Director Edwards. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to the general manager's report.
Thank you. I'm gonna be a little brief on this one. If it ever comes up. Yep, got it. There we go. So we're coming into the last quarter of the water year, so all of what you see is good through June 30th, so these are July 1 numbers. So the water year will conclude July, August, September, so it's 9 months. And again, the first graph just shows the two pieces of the water resource system, Carmel River and Seaside Groundwater Basin, and shows that we are under budget, which is a good thing. The budget, of course, as you know, quarterly is based on the legal limits and then allocated by month based on historical patterns. So that 7314 compares favorably to the target of 7430. Which is a good takeaway for those of you who are really into the weeds and would go look at last year's report, which the bottom 2018 actuals are listed. These have actually changed somewhat because of somebody going back into the data and slightly tweaking them. So I know that all of you were noticing that change from last year's report. But anyway, in case anybody ever does go back, there were some changes made. In the next
So Dave, before you go,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind, so just for clarification, the FY 2018 actual, is it through 9 months?
Yes,
Not the you were talking. Okay.
correct. Right, yeah, so they always track the same period. It's just occasionally numbers will go back and get reallocated or modified slightly. On the next chart, this is just the component elements of some of those other items. They all get lumped together otherwise. The one thing I wanted to point out here is the data shows that Sand City desal came back online and was producing in the last month compared to the prior month, which is a positive development. And then finally, production for customer service. I'll take you to the bottom right-hand corner. We are 237 acre-feet below last year. However, July and August are peak heat months, so some of that could be made up on irrigation and other. And then the 12-month moving average remains sufficiently below what we call the Rule 160 production limit, meaning there's no indication of rationing or stepping into conservation rates or anything like that. So we're progressing pretty well for the water year. And that concludes this presentation. On item 13, this will be an oral report today. A couple of you know where I spent my entire day today, as did half our audience and 2 of our directors. So I do want to report that in your correspondence received is a letter from California American Water. You may have already read about it in the press. This is a notice of default. The district and Monterey One Water have drafted a response letter. There's a request for a response within 14 days. That will be likely going out tomorrow, jointly under both of our signatures and our combined Pure Water Monterey letterhead. And in case you missed it, I do want to point out that, yes, people have said that they're disappointed that we're late and so forth. I think one of the important takeaways is we're about 3 months behind the scheduled date, and somebody said about 10% over in cost. We also have secured over 25 million in grants. By comparison, the desal plant is about 3 to 4 years late, and 50+ million, 56 million over its settlement agreement number for cost cap back when originally projected, and has only received 10 million in grant proceeds. So sometimes we lose sight of how hard it is to bring projects online, on budget, on time. The Coastal Commission met last Thursday in dispute resolution and decided that yes, indeed, they have the right and the ability to receive an appeal directly from the company, and so that appeal will be heard at an upcoming commission meeting. The next one's in Eureka. They tend to want to make themselves available locally, so it might not be the next one. We have a former coastal commissioner who might be able to speak to what they think, but it's likely to happen in the next couple of months. And then today, the supervisors heard the appeal on the consolidated county permit and determined that they were not going to hear the appeal, so that in effect makes the commission's previous decision to approve the project stands. And so they have their use permit, their architectural review, and the grading permit, which is, for those of you following the milestone sweepstakes, is a good thing relative to the cease and desist orders milestone. Then finally, on June 18th, the State Water Board heard, and I think we talked about this at Water Supply Planning, heard the intended use plan for state revolving fund monies, which included full funding for the California American desal plant from two separate sources in the state revolving fund, the clean water side and the safe drinking water side. So that augurs very well for low-cost money available. There'll very likely still be an equity component from the company. There will still be the construction funding surcharge that was allowed through the decision, but it will probably result in us, the district, not proceeding forward with what's called the securitization or the ratepayer relief bonds that we went through and got legislation for and we're preparing to get started on. We have a call with the company next week to talk about that. It doesn't make sense, if there's a high degree of likelihood that all of the remaining debt component can be satisfied through state revolving fund, which is going to be cheaper money than a district public financing, which is also more complex in its nature, then it doesn't make sense for us, the district, to spend $300,000 to $400,000 up front for a financing order for a shadow rating with the rating agencies, and basically to qualify this financing and get it ready, sitting on a shelf, waiting. So that's going to be the subject of our conversation next week. But we need some sort of sign that it's highly likely that the state revolving fund will be used for the remaining piece. And the state hasn't been able to give me the 100% comfort I'm looking for. So that'll be part of a conversation that we have next week with the company. But so those are the current developments and everything going on.
At Water Supply, you talked about PG&E, the power switching for, is that gonna be any delay in that, or do that have anything to do with Pure Water Monterey getting on phase one?
Right, that's a great question. So the original plan was to fire up phase one, the 3,500 acre feet, on landfill gas. And we've got a very favorable rate structure through the landfill gas contract. And I say gas, it's run through a turbine and produces electricity. That wasn't ready to go due primarily to some objections that PG&E had over their deal with the landfill and the switchgear and so forth. So we made the election to go to the street to get power from PG&E directly, and that's what was built at the Advanced Water Purification Facility. And then in order to take the cheaper power, we will swap out the switchgear for roughly $300,000 and some odd along maybe 8 to 10 months from now. So that has not affected the schedule. It's not been a critical path item because we made the decision early on to take PG&E power from the street first. But long-term for the savings, we'll want to make the swap. And so that'll be happening while we're operating the facility, and then the switch will be made at some point.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dave, on that, that's kind of new information that wasn't brought out at the committee meeting. So the concept is to switch out, because it seems to me that from an engineering perspective, that depending solely on the methane generated, not having an alternate supply when things go wrong is problematic.
Well, I think we'll be in position of redundancy at this point because of what we'll do, and I can confirm that for you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to build and then unbuild. It would make more sense to build and then turn it off.
Do any other directors have questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 14, the report, attorney's report on the 6 p.m. closed session.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. The board did meet in closed session at 6 p.m. There were 3 items on the agenda. The first was conference with labor negotiators. The topic was the general staff and management bargaining units. The board did receive a report from its general manager, chief labor negotiator on this matter, and the board did provide guidance to the general manager as to positions to be taken at the bargaining table, but no specific reportable action was taken. As to the 2 matters of pending litigation, status updates were provided by counsel and amplified by your general manager. But again, aside from general direction, no specific reportable action was taken. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Any directors have questions? Okay, we'll move on to item 15, directors' reports, AB 1234 reports on trips, conference attendance, and meetings. Any directors have any reports?
Yes, I have one, Chair. Last Monday through Wednesday, I attended the Special Districts Leadership Academy Conference it's designed for board members. And so some really good information was provided dug deeply into Brown Act compliance as well as financing of capital projects. So I found it very, very useful.
Great. Look forward to learning from you. Anyone else? Okay, wonderful. And we'll move on to item 16, an update on status of Ryan Ranch Unit of California American Water and use of the emergency intertie between Bishop and Ryan Ranch units.
Yes, thank you. And this is mostly just a report on direction provided by the Water Supply Planning Committee meeting of July 9th. The issue at hand had been that since February of last year, 2018, the Ryan Ranch, the remaining Ryan Ranch well number 7, was failing, and the company began to rely on the intertie with the Bishop system, and almost all of the needs of the Ryan Ranch system were met for several months through the Bishop system, which, based on our conditions of the water distribution system permit, is really only supposed to happen on an emergency basis. Well, it's certainly an emergency because you need to provide, but it's not a long-term solution. And so we requested meeting with the company. We made a suggestion that they should apply to combine the systems, the Ryan Ranch with Bishop. That runs a little bit in the face of the proposal to issue a moratorium on the same systems by the company in its current application. To the company's credit, they went out and took the issue head on and rehabbed the well. The rehab has worked. They think that they'll be able to run it in the 60 to 70 gallons per minute range. Our concerns as a district is that's right at the edge of current demand in the Ryan Ranch system. Under Title 22 standards for public water systems, with fewer than 1,000 service connections, which this has, we would find that not to be adequate to be providing redundancy. Because there's no residential units in Ryan Ranch, and because the county public health department is the regulator, not the Department of Drinking Water, they've kind of hand-wavingly said, well, the intertie is your redundancy when and if needed. Because of the performance history of over-reliance on the intertie or the interconnection, we don't believe that that serves as redundancy. So we were looking at it again as a district to say, well, rehab the well, let's see what you can get. Our confidence wasn't completely satisfied in terms of how much water it can produce. You know, wells do have a tendency to degrade as well, so there may be a capacity curve issue. Nevertheless, we think it's awesome that they rehabbed it. We don't feel that it adequately represents redundancy. Our suggestion was to either come up with an alternative or combine the systems and then deal with the combined Bishop-Ryan Ranch system. And to the company's credit, they've come back with a proposal to interconnect to the Cal-Am main system using surplus seaside groundwater basin water that can't be purposed to offset Carmel River diversion. So in effect, it's available. And that can be done by April of next year, I think. Yeah, that's the target timeline on page 96 of the staff report. So the direction from the Water Supply Planning Committee for the rest of your edification was move forward with this plan, have us, the district, monitor that they're in fact, roughly achieving these dates and times set out. And there's no reason then to also combine the two systems and go through the CEQA work and the water distribution system amendment process for that. So that's currently where we stand, and we'll just track it and see where it goes. And I think it's a good permanent solution. It will be incumbent upon Cal-Am to deal with the detractor or two who's going to say, well, prove to me or show to me that taking that water to the satellite isn't coming at the expense of the river, because that's been the kind of the typical discussion as to why the satellites hadn't been interconnected to date. They have authorization to connect through a previous filing that was approved, and so this is just following through on that. And representatives of Cal-Am are here if you've got any pointed questions.
Okay. Directors, any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In the staff report, they said that intertie was open from February 2018 until 6/19 this year, 6/14 this year.
Well, no, they turned the, I guess you're right, because the well went back on for production 6/14, so yeah, they relied on the interconnection.
So they've been, that intertie been open for a year, over a year. And I think during water supply, somebody asked a question, I think it was Director Hoffman, what happens if they violate that? We wasn't notified, they went over our heads, they opened it up, and we just, what happens since they do that? Somebody tell me.
Well, I think the phrase that was used was nice guy. We were the nice guy. We didn't do any enforcement action. One of the strategic plan initiatives that you did adopt this year was to better quantify what all of the conditions we have put on folks, not just Cal-Am, but anybody who's got a water distribution system permit or other permit, and track our conditions a little bit more closely so that we don't stumble into these things as well. But yes, we could have done administrative processes that would result in penalties and so forth. We chose not to do that. We did start this process probably 6 months ago saying, let's come up with a solution.
Okay, and prior to that, how many times was that intertie open, or do we know? How do we know when that intertie is open and they violating something?
So we do know because data is shared, but that's not always the data anyone's assigned to look for. And so when we kind of caught up to it, we said, hey, let's check the data. And yes, we were a little surprised to see that when it began. One of the conditions of the permit is notification, and we weren't notified. There were personnel changes and things happening as well. What's typically happened with the connection to the main system, and that's been open with frequency, when there's storage in Ryan Ranch, and when there was an issue with storage, it got open several years ago. The treatment plant sometimes can be a little balky. So there's been situations through time where it's been opened. The notification has typically happened. A lot of times it's a day or two or three or four after the fact, and it's a courtesy, but it does happen. They do the best they can. I think this one, the surprise for us was it'd been going on for 8 months, yeah.
Another question is, how many times the wells out here in Wine Ranch has been rehabbed? When it's a problem, we always come up with that, we rehab the wells, and we still got a problem after that.
Well, I could say right now there isn't a problem other than the what-if problem, which is the capacity is lower than, so when we approved the moratorium in Ryan Ranch in 2009, our system capacity limit of 72 acre-feet, which exceeds current demand of all the businesses in Ryan Ranch, which is, you know, roughly around 50 acre-feet a year. That was based on 101 gallons per minute. And so now if we're into a rehabbed well at 60 to 70, then you're probably not going to be able to support the system capacity limit of 72 acre-feet, which means you're down closer to 45 to 55, somewhere right around what the full usage has been here in Ryan Ranch. So we're close to the edge. You head into July and August. Luckily, no one seems to be doing that much irrigation anymore here, but they could, you know, in hot months. And so our concern is, if this were a public water system, that you need redundancy. There isn't redundancy, so let's do something. And that really was the conversation with the company, which is, you know, despite certain calls for penalties, we're not going to penalize you, but let's solve this thing. And I think they've come up with a good solution.
Well, part of the discussion was the fact that the water availability is dropping in that area. The water level is dropping.
Yeah, it's
And
really,
so that's a natural occurrence that no matter how many times you rehab the well, it's not going to fix how much water's available.
Yeah, and the other comment I would have is dovetailing on what was said, is that when we don't enforce the provisions of our permit to any water agency or district water supplier, then they can adopt a mentality of why bother complying if they know that no enforcement action is going to be taken. So it's more of sending a message, I think, than actually monetary penalties in my mind.
So is there a moratorium on Ryan Ranch right now?
yes.
Is it okay?
And it's our moratorium.
It's our moratorium.
And if we combined the systems, Ryan Ranch and Bishop, we would be in a position where we'd lift our moratorium because Bishop would serve as an outside source of supply. Ryan Ranch would no longer be constrained at the same level. And then we would be heading in a direction kind of opposite of the application that the company just put in to set a moratorium on new connections here, Bishop, and Hidden Hills. So this way, our moratorium stays in place until that application is heard at the PUC. It can be added to or doubled down in Ryan Ranch, if you will. But yeah, there's still a connection moratorium here unless, for example, Chomp was able to purchase entitlement water through DBO and Cypress investors that then we can front load through the interconnection, theoretically front load, but offset.
Okay, and just my final question is, how much would it cost the district if we do water demand, put that system together? They violate it, we go ahead and do what we need to do to fix that. How much it gonna cost us? How much time?
No, it would just cost time and legal expense, but the solution that they've provided is probably a better, more permanent fix, and it gets us away from having to make certain CEQA findings that we might be uncomfortable with. Doing an analysis of continued Bishop pumping to serve the Ryan Ranch system, we would have to look at the conjoint effects between some of the other wells, and there could be effects that we'd need to study. So it's, it's one of these where, okay, it's happened, nobody's been permanently harmed, but it's just not the way to run a system. And so combining the two was a solution. Absent an alternative, this is a better solution. And I think that was the conclusion of the Water Demand Committee, your comment, which is don't go down the path of combining the systems if this is gonna actually happen.
And if it don't happen, what are you gonna do? Give them okay, you got another 3 months. Tell me what you're gonna do now, because I might be here next year.
Well, we're counting on you being here next year. And I think we've heard it loud and clear that you would like a stronger enforcement
I think-
position.
I think since we're discussing this, and I don't know if you're gonna take it out to the public or what.
I was not planning to, but I
Okay,
have my
just
own
wanna know,
questions.
because I'm gonna say my piece right now. We should be going parallel with them, because if they miss it, we wanna hit it. So that's me, that's my thought. I love this, you know, we the nice guys. It's time for us to be the, hey, look, you violated, we're here, we're gonna do this. Mr. Laredo do what he gotta do, Water Demand do what they gotta do, Cal-Am do what they gotta do, because they better do it. And we just march on. And I don't agree with that, with the committee going 3-0 on that when we should be enforcing. And I know I don't want to take it to a board vote because you only need one more vote. I know you ain't going to change your minds on it. So I just hope we look at this, and I hope we get a warning earlier, and we follow them and make sure that Intertie is not open anytime they get ready to open it. We've been having problems with Bryan Ranch for a long time. I know we've been having problems with it. And y'all know we've been having problems with it, so let's fix it if they're not gonna fix it.
Well, I think part of the discussion in water supply was the fact that we need a better long-term solution. Because, John, what did you say the Bishop water level was dropping by?
About a foot, 2.5 a year.
So the water level itself in Bishop
Yeah.
is dropping. We have to have a better solution, which is what water supply agreed on.
And just a question on that. It was dropping historically, but then we've had some really high wet weather. And so when will we know if that's reversed that trend or not?
It has not reversed that trend. It is the Laguna Seca area is in long-term overdraft. These wet winters have slowed the trend somewhat, but there's still fall.
And just to follow up on what Jeannie said, Alvin, yeah, what we agreed to in the water supply, water demand committee was the concept of not combining the two systems because that was problematic with regard to CEQA stuff, and not to and to allow Cal-Am the opportunity to do this other solution in the interim. But I agree with you that moving forward, if they don't meet the deadlines that they imposed on themselves to make the correction, that we look at it again from the standpoint of taking some enforcement action.
Thank you.
Through the chair, Dave, if I can, I'm going to make a statement, but if I'm wrong, correct it. If I'm right, I don't need a response. But I'm tying the condition 2 issue with the CDO to this issue. There's an approach that the district's been trying to take with the condition 2 that would free up a little bit of room for some changes in the metering regimen and allow for some changes. Cal-Am has taken the hard no position that no, they don't want to allow that, and so that it's a definition of the CDO condition 2. How do you interpret it? And it seems to me that the district is trying to interpret with some flexibility. Cal-Am is not. I just want to compare that to the Ryan Ranch issue too. I think if the district had its way, there would be some flexibility or some assurance that there's more comfort with this conclusion or the supply than the Cal-Am approach today, because they're operating on the edge. I'm just trying to make the point that as the district moves forward looking for flexibility, it seems to me the Cal-Am approach is to not allow that. And it seems to me that works against the community. If I'm in the ballpark, that's okay.
You're in the ballpark, but
Okay.
so Cal-Am is not adopting a position relative to condition 2 that is contrary in effect, they've said, hey, we recognize that there's confusion that needs resolution, and we will work with what the resolution is. Now, there are members in this community who are still around, who, when Condition 2 reheated back up, thought that CalAm should have taken a more strong advocacy position consistent with the district's position, because that's what we do here on the peninsula and have done, and the confusion results from one enforcement person at the state and one representative of CalAm going on a case-by-case basis and saying, what do you think of this one? I don't know, what do you think of that one? And we were looking for the comfort of consistency so that everybody knew what the rules were. But I won't say that they're working against our intent. But I will reaffirm that we really wish they had taken a stronger position of advocacy at the time that this went forward, and I think we all agree with that. In Ryan Ranch and Bishop, I'm not sure you can make the analogy. I think they're doing the best they can to deal with a really lousy system. And I think maybe no one's going to say this is a really lousy system, but it's never performed to the degree it was desired to perform to. Yet it's this isolated satellite. And when you're stuck with that, if you can't meet demand, and that's really our first starting point, which is we want the communities, businesses that are here to open the tap and see water. So that's priority one, is making sure they have water. When you know it's hard to get there, is 8 months an emergency? Well, it probably is when you don't have any other solution, but it's not a good solution. It's not a long-term solution, but they're trying to do the right thing here, and I think they're doing it.
So I have a question on the, so it was opened in February of 2018, and when did the notification come into the district that it had been opened? Approximately.
Yeah, it was probably September, August, September, in that time frame.
Okay. So it's a condition of the water distribution permit that there's notification. It is not necessarily the district's responsibility to find out if that had been opened, correct?
Right.
So what was the reason given for the lack of notification?
You know, I can't really recall, to be honest. I'd be making something up at this point. But, you know, once it was known and we reached out and had the conversation, it was pretty much recognized that something has to be done.
Okay.
And
So is there anyone from CalAm here who can answer that question?
probably not, because
Yeah, no, all I can say is I really like the Mr. Stoltz's answer of August 2018 was when you were notified, because that's when I started my new operations position. But but in terms of the notification period, I don't have the history on it. I'm not sure. I know that we knew that the well needed to be rehabbed for a while and that it had been shut down because it needed that.
But you knew it had been opened. You knew the intertie had been opened.
Yes, we knew that it had been
And
opened.
you know that it's a condition of your permit to notify the district when you open it?
No, at the time I didn't know that in terms of the permitting, no.
Not
So-
you personally.
Not me personally.
company.
Exactly, but the company,
The company knows.
I'm assuming they did.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's been the recurring problem is, and it's, you know, it's still people-driven organizations, and people have changed over, and, you know, even, you know, his predecessor was there for a number of openings of the main system interconnect, and he'd call me. But it was also his predecessor who was in that seat when this one was open for, you know, 6 months. So sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. I think our learning is, and what we've put into the plan for this year is, let's make sure everyone understands their conditions. I mean, we have these front-loading agreements, and I'm not sure they work perfectly either. You know, we talk about, well, the easiest way to do something is, you know, push the water in so we know we've counted it. But it's hard. I will even tell you with, you know, ASR and with other things, there's counting water molecules, but you're never 100% certain that that one came from where you thought it came from. And so a lot of this is, I won't say on the fly. It's not meant to be on the fly, but I completely understand when somebody just doesn't know it's a permit condition, because a little bit of it, to the two directors' point, is over time, if you don't enforce, then people don't look at their conditions. But a lot of times, people are like, what is the district's system? I have to amend, do what? And they go through the process and they do the amendment and we issue the permit amendment, and it's not clear that anybody other than, Lori Gerard in one case, read it because the draft came across her desk, and then it just gets done. And so I think it's incumbent upon both organizations to know what your permit conditions are, and
Yes, I agree.
and just try to pay greater attention. But back to the issue of delivering water, if they opened it and then told us, and we said, okay, it's been more than 5 days, you're in violation of your permit conditions, our priority is still to get water to the customers so that their taps.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm not saying that that is not a priority. I find it, I am disappointed that the notification wasn't given
Yeah.
in a timely fashion when that should be a known. If
Yeah.
they've done it in the past, that's a known, and they know they have to do it in the future. And so why that got skipped is why that's the question that I'm asking.
It's a good question.
So in the solution, is there any environmental impacts that need to be looked at? Since you mentioned that the solution that the district had proposed carries some CEQA work with it that may not be what we want to hear. Are there environmental impacts to CalAM's solution? And will there be a CEQA done on that, or has there been?
Yeah, they'll have
or-
to do the checklist, and they'll have to make a determination. It's going to be a little more straightforward. It's going to be more like traffic impacts during construction. It'll be the construction-related things. The only other kind of long-term is this issue of does it or does it not affect withdrawals from the Carmel River? And we've been assured that the hydraulics currently, I mean, they can change over time, but current situation is that argument can be made. And anything to add from the cheap seats?
The comment was that they're gonna have to amend the water distribution system, and therefore we have
Yeah, we have-
goal, and we're gonna have to comply with secret for that.
All right, thank you. Any other directors? Any comments?
Yeah, dovetailing on what you said, Chair, is that if they had notified us after the 5 days that they were going to have to continually have this intertie open, then through the permitting process and enforcement, we could have said, okay, after the 5 days, give us tell us what you're going to do within 30 days, and put them on a schedule.
Thank
But
you.
what ends up happening is
Thank you.
we
Yeah.
find out 6 months later, and then 6 months later they come in and say, oh, we have this proposed solution. So a year has passed of them using this emergency connection when if they'd have notified us as they should have, then the process could have been much farther along by this time.
Yes, thank you.
And I
That
would
was
like
the
to
point I
add
was.
one more item, or one more
getting at.
piece to this. There's no guarantee that the intertie won't have to be opened yet again
Right.
until April or May of when this comes online because of operating parameters, so.
Right.
we just-
And I assume we'll have a more timely notice.
And that's my point of, hey, we start to amend that system, they'll be on top of it. If we started while they starting, but I see we not there yet, so.
I was not going to have public comment on it, but Mr. Turner, if you'd like to say something, please.
Dan Turner, Monterey. In this case, it's Dr. Turner. I was a licensed dentist in the state of California. It was not only the State Board of Dental Examiners, but there were other regulatory agencies. Covered all sorts of things from radiation to various sorts of monitoring of the sterilization equipment, all sorts of things. Now, someone had come to my office from one of those boards, and I wasn't doing something properly, and I said, we've had a lot of turnover, and like the person, I at the very least would have been slapped with a fine, a significant fine. Might have had, the State Board of Dental Examiners suspends people's license for this. The suspension is usually stayed. They don't usually make you stop practicing for a year, but sometimes they do. This is serious business. I can't believe how casual we are about this. I want to go on record saying I don't think the district should be casual about this at all. It's CalAM's job to make sure that when there's a change in personnel, that person is well-trained, knows what he or she is doing. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. So I'd like to move on to item number 17, our first public hearing of the night. Consider the second reading and adoption of Ordinance 183, adding Rule 20E, establishing a zone of controlled drinking water well construction and a zone of potential controlled drinking well water well construction related to pure water Monterey injection of highly purified water. John, didn't I ask you to shorten that title?
I was just going to say, well said, Chair.
Maybe I should.
Yes, it is second reading, so yeah. Chair Evans, members of the board, this is the second reading of Ordinance 183. To provide a quick summary, this ordinance will establish a new rule, Rule 22E, in our well permitting process, and it will address a statute in the Title 22 Drinking Water Regulations requiring this zone of control and a secondary zone of more intense study that are required. We must set this prior to beginning operation injecting of pure water Monterey water. The specific section is listed on this slide. I've bolded the most important points of it, and it is you must establish a zone that represents 180 days of travel away from the wells. This is done to achieve the correct amount of log removal of bacteria in the injected water, or if there were, this would be to remove that. On a secondary zone that is represented by a 2-year travel time away from an injection well, and any well that goes into this zone has to have an intensified study that putting a well in and starting to operate that well will not change the flow paths in a way that would put any other well around there to receive water that would be less than 180 days. So when we look at our project facilities that are out there, on the eastern side, we have the injection wells for pure water Monterey. We have the Vados zones that are going to be putting 30% of the injected water into the Paso Robles aquifer, the upper aquifer, and the deep injection wells that are going to be putting 70% of the injection water into the Santa Margarita aquifer. So there are 4 injection wells, 2 shallow, 2 deep. And so each of these areas, the upper aquifer and the lower aquifer, will have these 2 zones of protection. We have our existing ASR well fields out there. Calam has Peralta and Ord Grove and Luzerne and their Seaside well fields. So we have to see how these zones will interact with these wells that are going to be recovering the injected water. When we look at the structure of the basin and we look at this cross section, we can see that the aroma sands, those are all the dune sands you see out on Fort Ord, overlay the Paso Robles aquifer, which again are the targets for the Vados zone wells, and then the deep injection wells are the targets for, the deep injection wells are screened in the Santa Margarita aquifer. So on the left-hand side, we have the pure water Monterey injection wells, and the flow paths are going to be away from those through the monitoring well that's seen in the middle and into the ASR wells, and they are going to be the first ones that will encounter the injected water. So in modeling, we can model the water being injected, and we can see the timing of the flow paths as they go out and are recovered in recovery wells. And we went through with a number of people, and we used the Seaside Watermaster mod flow model that was used, and it was the same one that was used in the EIR for consistency's sake. And we worked with Calam to come up with realistic pumping scenarios for recovering this water when the project comes online. And we worked with Monterey One Water to see how they were going to operate their pure water Monterey injection field. And we complied with the water rights and all the state board orders and these rules. We also were required to use the most intense drought in this time period, over the model time period, because that would represent the fastest moving groundwater. The first slide I showed you was water moving through the sandstone, Santa Margarita sandstone, and this slide is water moving through the Paso Robles aquifer. When you take The travel zones represented by the 180-day travel zone, time zone, and the 2-year time zone, what we get is the red is represented of 180 days of travel time away from injection wells in the shallow Paso Robles aquifer, and the blue is represented by the 180-day travel time in the Santa Margarita sandstone. So we have to put this map into the ordinance and accept this map as part of the ordinance. Once we do the tracer test and understand exactly how fast water is moving, Department of Drinking Water would like us to take those travel times and use those travel times and reestablish this zone, so that reestablishment or just adapting a new map for this rule will be can be done by resolution and will be brought back to you at that time. So how will this be applied? Any permit for a well that is issued within our district, application is set at Monterey County Health and then forwarded to us for review. Our staff will review it, and Rule 22E will require us to compare it to these maps. If it's seen to be within the 180-day travel time, the permit will be denied. The 2-year zone process will be similar, but if it's within that 2-year zone, we will work with the applicant and we will work with them to study and how the requirements that will need to be met to show that it's not going to alter the flow paths and alter the 180-degree zone in any way that's going to interfere with another person's well. So the important findings are an agreement between Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, Monterey County Water Resources Agency, and the Pajaro Valley Water Management District from 1993, which gives this district the exclusive authority to regulate the management of the Seaside groundwater basin at that time that was underlying Fort Ord. But Monterey County Water Resources Agency will be the person that regulates any water distribution systems in that zone. So the Marina Coast Monterey County Water Resources Agency recognizes Marina Coast as a water purveyor in the Ord community, and the Marina Coast Water District is not allowed to drill water supply wells within the Seaside Basin, so this zone will not affect any well that Marina Coast is looking to put into their system. They would not be allowed just on the fact that they would be in the adjudicated basin. And also, one of the findings is that we do know that Title 22 regulations are currently being reviewed at the state to allow for future direct potable use, which they call raw water augmentation. And we were told that if Pure Water Monterey wanted to pursue and reobtain permits for a raw water augmentation project, if it meets those requirements, these control zones could sunset because you wouldn't need the travel time. There were some non-substantial changes that were requested after the first meeting, and they both came from Marina Coast Water District. We had cited in the first ordinance that they were formed in 1970, but they wanted that changed in 1960. 1970, they were voted by the public vote to become the Public Water and Wastewater District, but prior to that, there were a private company that was called Marina County Water District. And they also asked to have their newer annexation map replaced in the ordinance. So it would go from the one on the left to the one on the right. So those are the. And then this I put in here for you, Director Potter, with your question of how do we know if there are wells in the area. So I went and researched that. And the land use above this is controlled by Fort Ord Reuse Authority, and it had the phase 2, the final munitions removal in this area done from 2007 to 2009. This area was cleaned to what they call residential standard to be prepared to receive the Seaside expansion and build the Eastern Causeway along the border of City of Seaside and the National Monument. And it included 419 acres, so a much larger area than these zones actually represent. And the munitions removal activities included using of ground penetrating radar and scraping of the soil column. And there were no abandoned or active wells that were discovered in these control zones that were describing. And then here's some pictures of the actual areas and the control zones that they were scraping and cleaning from the Army's report. So the staff recommendation is that the board receive public comment on ordinance 183 on a second reading, approve the second reading of the ordinance, and if so chooses, adopt the ordinance.
Okay, thanks, John. Any directors have questions for staff? Director Hoffman?
Yeah, I'm looking at the ordinance. It refers to the 180-day and that the permit will be denied, but I don't see any reference to the 2-year and what the process is if somebody proposes a well within the 2-year time of travel.
I think,
Or am I missing something?
yeah, I think, let me get
Because based on what you said, it seemed like it was possibly permissible.
It is permissible, and the ordinance talks about that the district staff will work with the applicant to define a study that would be required, and that study would be at the expense of the applicant. And what that study likely would be is to add that well to the groundwater model and operate that well in the groundwater model and see how that affects the flow paths that the control zones are based on.
Yeah, again, in reading through the ordinance, I don't see any
Director
reference to
Hoffman, I think it's on packet page 103 at the top.
Yeah, it's item 2 of C.
Okay, secondary control zone.
Yes.
Okay, I was looking for the specific reference to the 2-year travel. That's why I didn't catch that. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Director Adams?
Just had a question under the discussion points. In order for Pure Water Monterey to inject advanced treated water into the Seaside Basin, a permit from the Department of Drinking Water is required. Do we have any idea of when that will be obtained?
We're in the process of a review panel, and it also includes the approval of the tracer test, which we have started and are working with them to get. We were supposed to have a meeting this week on it, but that was canceled by Department of Drinking Water, and it was moved. So Monterey 1 is the lead agency on those permits, and so I'm technical support on them, and then bringing this ordinance to you. So I can find that out for you, but I don't know that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions?
I see you went through Marina Coastal with this.
Yes.
Anybody else have to approve it except us, or do we have to go to county, back to Marina Coastal for the Monterey 1 for approval or something?
No, this is, it came out at the meetings with Monterey 1 and us and Department of Drinking Water that they would like some type of control on these zones, and the district, it turns out, has the ability to control those zones. So it's come to you, and it's your decision alone, but it has been vetted with all the players, and it's gone through the Seaside Water Master as well.
Yeah, I appreciate what you've done. You've done a lot, so nobody can complain about this. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
And I want just one more. So I'm looking at the reference, and it says that we will work with the Monterey County Health and the applicant to demonstrate appropriate travel time to the proposed well. What is the intent with that? Who is going to make a decision regarding whether or not the well is appropriate?
It would be the district, and the appropriate would be that does the operation of this well change the primary control zone enough that it would pull the primary control zone over to that well. So if you put this well in the ground and you still don't intercept water in less than 180 days, that would be the appropriate time. So it's to just show that that's their caution, to say someone's not gonna come along and put 4 municipal wells along a corridor that they have, and then
Around the outside, like, for example,
and
of
then
the...
alter enough that they're trying to protect themselves from future developments.
Okay, thank you.
This time I'll open it up to public comment.
Good evening, Paul Bruno, resident of Monterey. I was sleeping in the back of the room, and all of a sudden my ears perked up hearing some Water Master stuff. I unfortunately don't attend the TAC meeting, so I'm not really aware of what was happening here. Hearing this discussion, it made me concerned about a couple things. Wells are a property right, and some people have adjudicated rights in the Seaside Basin, such as Mission Memorial. I saw their property up there. I do not know where their well is located, but if this zone, the 2-year zone, or however this starts to creep, affects their well or affects their ability to put a well in, that might be a problem for someone like that. Perhaps we can allow for that by adding a paragraph in there about people who have adjudicated rights in the Seaside Basin. If this were to somehow impact their ability to have their well or reset a well, that they would have a non-discretionary, actually have a right to set a well on another property, wheel the water, or whatever they need to do in order to get water to their parcel, because their opportunity to put the well is now kind of being stopped because of the injection of the water. So it's something we might want to consider. I'm not sure exactly whose wells might be affected, but being that we don't know how big this zone goes over time, we should be concerned about those. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, then I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board.
So I have a question. Is that something that can be considered in this?
Well, I don't think we need to at this point. In John's work and the modeling, so the black dashed line is that's the
2-year.
the secondary
Right, and
zone.
Mission Memorials, it doesn't reach Mission
Right,
Memorials.
and so we made sure that the secondary zone didn't affect the likely locations of any well expansion, and that includes Seaside Municipal as well, so not just the cemetery.
And Madam Chair, speaking of the process, such a change would be a substantive change to this. You cannot adopt that at second reading. You would have to
Send it
send it
back.
back to first reading. So I do suggest that if you are interested in that concept, that could be brought back at a later time as a further amendment to your rules and regs.
Okay.
But for your,
Who is the property owner in this, in the exclusion zone?
Currently, it's Fora, but it's transitioning to the city of Seaside, and it will be developed at some point in time, and the Marina Coast will be the purveyor providing water to that development, and all of their water will come from the Salinas Valley. And so and because they're not, Marina Coast is not named in the adjudication decision, they can't put a well in the basin and pump out of it, so.
Okay, all right, thanks.
If I could, one more. So on the, let's say somebody comes in and wants to put a well in within the 2-year delineated area, and they show that they do in fact impact the 180-day zone, what would be the determination that we would do in that case on that application?
So the rule as it would flow, there's a number when a well permit comes in, it gets asked a number of questions, and it gets put down a decision tree. And at some point in time, if a well were to be in that situation, the question would be asked, it's within this 2-year zone, now we need a study, that we need a hydrogeologic study that shows that if you operate this well, it will not change groundwater flow, that so it engulfs itself into the primary zone. So, to put numbers on it, if they came and wanted to put a well very close to the primary zone, and it was 181 days before they put the well in, and now it's 179, that would be a finding, and the permit, you would work with them and you say, is there another spot you can put this well that wouldn't make this happen?
So what you're saying is that if an applicant proposed a well and the hydrogeologic study showed that it would impact the perimeter of the 180-day zone, then we would likely deny their ability to.
No, the 180-day perimeter zone can be affected and would be affected by any other pumping within that 2-year control zone, but it cannot be affected so that another existing well, it would move that zone and affect another property owner or the well itself that's being put in.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
I just have one question. You said that this is an area that is forward that would be developed.
Correct.
What's the likelihood anybody's gonna put any wells in here?
It would be a large house on some acreage that wanted to put a well in, and if you use less than 5 acre-feet in the seaside adjudication decision, you're considered de minimis, so it'd likely be an irrigation well on a large property.
I don't imagine Marina Coast or Marina is going to subdivide into 40-acre parcels.
I don't know if there's a plan yet.
Anyway.
Yeah. All right. Okay. I will entertain a motion on
Make a
the
motion
ordinance.
to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, Director Byrne, and a second from Director Edwards. Is there any further discussion?
Just roll call?
Yes, it is. Any further discussion? Okay, then we'll call the question. Roll call vote, please, Arlene.
Director Hoffman.
Aye, yes.
Director Riley.
Yes.
Director Potter. Director Adams.
Yes.
Director Byrne.
Yes.
Director Edwards.
Yes.
And Director Evans.
Yes.
Unanimous approval.
All right, and we'll move on to our second public hearing of the night. Number 18, consider approval of a CEQA addendum to the ASR EIREA for the water treatment facility modification.
And before Maureen gets started, I want to, some of you directors know, but I want to point out that Maureen came to us after kind of a mid-career decision to get a master's in water resources. But prior to that, she was a chemical engineer by training and a petroleum engineer by profession. And she just passed her PE, or professional engineers, in civil engineering without any work or educational background in civil engineering. So we're very proud of her. I know it's been probably almost a month and a half, 2 months, so it's not going to be new news much longer, but she should be lauded for that.
But that's not an invitation for hard questions, please. Yeah. Good evening. I'm here to ask the board to consider approval of a CEQA addendum to the ASR Environmental Impact Report Environmental Assessment for a water treatment facility. The project change includes increasing the capability of the water treatment facility, both in capacity and number of water treatment chemicals, construction of a building with associated appurtenances, an exterior injection manifold, and a truck delivery unloading pad and the associated works with that. I'll blow this map up a little bigger next time I use it. I apologize. The lower yellow pin is the facility at which the works will be constructed. It's the ASR Phase 1 Santa Margarita site. I've included an additional pin, the ASR Phase 2 Seaside Middle School site, as just a reminder that water treatment chemicals are disallowed at that site because the ASR site there is elevated above a playground, and the school board just wanted no chemicals in bulk whatsoever. This is a map of the project works. You can see the additional building in blue. The truck delivery route and unloading rack are shown in yellow, and the exterior injection manifold is in the area just south of the blue building. The CEQA history preceding this addendum is the August 2006 certification of the final EIR-EA for ASR Phase 1, which again is the Santa Margarita site. In April of 2012, the board adopted Addendum 1 to the EIR-EA, and that basically authorized the Seaside Middle School site and associated works there. In June of 2016, the board adopted Addendum 2 for the Hillby Pump Station. The Hillby Pump Station allowing Carmel River water to travel over the peninsula and be lifted up for injection at the ASR sites on General Jim Moore Boulevard. In February of 2017, the board adopted Addendum 3, approving a realignment of a section of the Monterey Pipeline. And in July of 2018, the board adopted Addendum 4 for the Backflush Basin Expansion Project. This Addendum 5 and Addendum 4 were originally conceived as one project. Some of the background behind why we have Addendum 5 and had to separate that from Addendum 4 starts in February 2018 when we agreed that the basis of design needed to be revised. The water treatment facility had new operational, I say standards, practices is really the more correct phrase for that, and personnel. Subsequent to that, we found that additional capability was required for stabilization of water up on General Jim Moore Boulevard. In March of 2018, we decided to phase the project. The site has a very limited construction window that's convenient to operations for pipeline tie-in. We have a summer and fall time that's more convenient to do backflush basin work, so we decided to expand the backflush basin in phase 1 while we were coming up with alternatives for the water treatment facility. The basin expansion was completed last November. In June of 2018, we met with all the stakeholders and selected a water treatment facility option. We had Fort Ord Reuse Authority, the city was there, and CalAm, ourselves, and some subcontractors. In December of 2018, we agreed with operations on the 10% basis of design, and the board funded this Addendum 5 in January of 2019. CEQA guidelines, section 15164, state that the lead or responsible agency shall prepare an addendum to a previously certified EIR if changes are necessary, but none of the conditions described in section 15162, calling for preparation of a subsequent EIR, have occurred. The findings in Addendum 5 were that project changes do not involve new significant environmental effects. The activities are similar to the activities previously evaluated. It found that project changes don't involve a substantial increase in the severity of previously identified significant effects. Environmental factors for aesthetics, cultural resources, and hazardous materials may significantly impact the environment without mitigation, but the environmental mitigation measures that we adopted in 2006 and 2012 apply and reduces those impacts to less than significant with mitigation. The addendum found circumstances have not substantially changed involving new significant environmental effects or a substantial increase in the severity of previously identified effects. There's also no new information of substantial importance that wasn't known or could not have been known at the time the previous EIR was certified, showing that the project will have one or more significant effects that were not discussed in the previous EIR. It's a little redundant. The conclusion is that the proposed project is a technical change that does not call for preparation of a subsequent EIR. I'm requesting or recommending that the board adopt Resolution 2019-11 with findings as Addendum 5 to the ASR EIR. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Maureen. Directors? Any questions for staff? Director Woods?
Thank you, Chair Evans. Did you go through Seaside with this?
Absolutely.
Design of the building, did that go through Seaside? You know, I know the last board members talked about the fence along there. Did anybody talk about the design of that building? Since is it gonna be like the building up on the hill or different?
It is going to be the same. I've been working closely with Planning Department. When we met with the city of Seaside to talk about the fence, at that point we showed the design of the building and its location.
Okay, and they were happy with it?
There were no comments or questions or concerns expressed.
Okay, thank you for going through them. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other directors with questions?
So what we're saying is that the increase in size of the chemical storage and the piping for the manifold was deemed to not be a significant change requiring, is that what the finding is?
That they were not different than those previously identified.
Right, so the increased capacity of chemical storage capacity was not deemed to be different or significant as compared to what was the original EIR.
In terms of the construction and operational impacts that are evaluated in the addendum, there was no difference in the environmental factors.
That's the finding that we're making here.
Correct.
Go ahead.
Then I will open this up to public comment. Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Okay, we have a motion, Director Potter, and a second, Director Riley. Is there any further discussion?
Just one comment. Good job to the engineer for getting this done. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right on. Right on. All right, then I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, motion passes unanimously. So that ends our very exciting July agenda. We will adjourn.